Have you ever experienced a spiritual awakening only to feel strangely unmotivated afterward? The goals you once chased feel empty. Your energy is gone, and nothing seems to make sense anymore. This isn't failure, it's transformation. Carl Jung called this the collapse of the false self, where the ego's illusions begin to dissolve, leaving behind silence and space. It's in this space that the true self begins to emerge. What you're feeling isn't laziness, it's your soul pulling away from superficial pursuits to find something deeper. In this video, we explore why this loss of motivation is not a sign of weakness, but a powerful step in becoming who you really are. This is where your real journey begins. At the heart of nearly every spiritual awakening lies a subtle but earth-shattering death of who we thought we were. It doesn't happen all at once. In fact, it often unfolds quietly like a slow erosion of old beliefs, identities, and attachments. One day, the goals that once seemed so important feel hollow. The ambition that used to ignite you suddenly feels performative. The friendships, the career path, the routines, they all start to feel like a costume you're wearing for someone else's stage. And underneath it all, a disorienting question begins to echo: who am I really? Carl Jung referred to this unraveling as the collapse of the false self. The persona. This self is not the real you, but the image you've been projecting to fit into society. It's the polished version you present in public, shaped by what others expect, what culture praises, and what your childhood wounds feared. It's the version of you that chased success to feel worthy, said yes to be liked, avoided conflict to feel safe. And for a long time, it worked, or at least, it seemed to. You built a life from it. But when you awaken to something deeper, when you begin to sense there's more to life than just surviving or performing, that mask begins to crack. This collapse can be terrifying, especially because the false self often feels like the only self we've ever known. When it starts to fall away, we feel empty, lost, and unmotivated. It's not because we are lazy or broken, it's because the fuel that once powered our lives is no longer accessible. The ego-driven ambitions that pushed us forward no longer make sense. We can't fake it anymore. The rewards of the external world lose their shine. And so, we enter what Jung might call the dark night of the soul, not a period of darkness for its own sake, but a necessary descent into the truth of who we are beyond the mask. This phase isn't comfortable, and many people resist it. We try to patch the mask back together. We distract ourselves with busyness, dive back into old habits, force ourselves to feel enthusiastic about things we no longer resonate with. But the soul knows better. The soul refuses to go backward. It whispers, this is not who you are anymore. And if you listen, even through the discomfort, you begin to understand something vital: the lack of motivation you feel is not failure's transformation. In Jungian psychology, transformation always begins with the death of an outdated identity. But that death is not an end. It is the necessary clearing before rebirth. Just as the caterpillar must dissolve into goo before becoming a butterfly, the false self must dissolve before the true self can emerge. And while it may feel like you are doing nothing, something profound is happening beneath the surface. Old stories are being released. Emotional programs are being rewritten. You are no longer reacting from the past. You are becoming aware. And that awareness is the birthplace of something far greater than motivation. It is the beginning of inner freedom. This is the first truth you must hold close: you are not losing your fire. You are learning how to burn from a deeper source. Once the false self begins to dissolve, what follows isn't clarity. It's not instant purpose or passion or peace. What usually comes next is silence, a vast, confusing emptiness that can feel more unsettling than the chaos that came before it. You've let go of the mask, but the face underneath is still blurry. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. And in this space in between, motivation disappears, desire fades. Even your sense of identity loosens. The world feels distant, and you ask yourself quietly, is this all there is? Carl Jung described this stage as the liminal zone, a psychological twilight where the old structure has fallen. But the new one hasn't been built. It's the moment after you've walked away from a burning house, but before you found shelter again. And because we live in a culture that worships productivity, silence is mistaken for stagnation. Stillness is mislabeled as laziness. But in Jung's view, this phase is not passive, it's sacred. The soul needs time to reassemble itself after a spiritual breakthrough. Your values are shifting. Your sense of self is reorganizing. The stories you used to tell yourself are fading. And the truth of who you are, your essence, is still whispering beneath the rubble. This space isn't meant to be filled with goals or strategies. It's meant to be felt, to be honored. And yet, it feels unbearable. We want to rush through it. We want to get back to doing, to building, to achieving, because that's where we used to find our sense of worth. But now, those things don't spark the same fire. That's because the part of you that was chasing them is gone. The part that needed applause, comparison, or external validation has fallen away. And what's left is silence, a kind of sacred silence. You are being emptied so that something true can finally enter. In this phase, the most important thing you can do is surrender. Not to hopelessness, but to the mystery of becoming. You don't need to force clarity. You need to trust that it will come not from the outside world, but from deep within. This is when Jung's idea of individuation begins to stir the process of becoming the self. Not the self that fits into categories and roles, but the self that was buried beneath all of them. The one that was always there, waiting to be remembered. You may feel grief. You may feel lost. But you are not alone in this terrain. Many have walked this path before you. It is the dark corridor that leads to inner freedom. If you can resist the urge to fill the silence and instead choose to listen to it, you will start to feel a new kind of guidance rising. One that isn't based on fear or ego. One that is rooted in authenticity. This is not the end of your story. It is the space where your real story begins. As the stillness stretches on and your old motivations remain out of reach, something inside you starts to grow restless. You may hear a subtle voice rise up within your wasting time. You need to snap out of this. Get back on track. This voice is sharp, anxious, and persuasive. It sounds logical. It sounds responsible. But it's not the voice of your awake and self, it's the voice of the ego in panic. Carl Jung understood the ego not as a villain, but as a necessary part of our psyche. It helps us navigate the world. It gives us a name, a story, a sense of separateness that allows us to function. But when we begin to evolve spiritually, the ego becomes terrified because its survival depends on the illusion of control, identity, and permanence. And now, all three are slipping through your fingers. You're no longer identifying with old goals. You've stopped reacting the same way to people or expectations. The mask is off, and without it, the ego feels naked. Its impulse is to rebuild quickly, reclaim all able, find a new identity, chase a new sense of worth. It wants you to fix what it perceives as broken. But here's the paradox: there's nothing to fix. You're not malfunctioning. You're dissolving, and that's an entirely different process. But the ego doesn't understand this. It wants to reattach to the world through productivity. So it feeds you guilt. You should be working harder. You should feel more excited. You should go back to the person you used to be. That guilt is a trap that lures you away from transformation and back into performance. And so begins the inner battle. One part of you knows the old life wasn't aligned, but another part misses its structure. You crave the comfort of being normal. You envy those who seem certain. You question your awakening. You doubt your journey. Jung would say this is the moment where many people give up the spiritual path. Not because they're weak, but because they mistake discomfort for failure. But discomfort is not a sign of regression. It is the fire that forges the new self. This chapter of your life is not about patching yourself up to fit back into the mold. It's about letting the old mold completely break so that what rises from the ashes is not a replica of your former self, but a truer, deeper version of you. One that is no longer motivated by fear of not being enough, but inspired by the quiet knowing that you already are. This is the ego's death rattle. It shouts to be heard. It demands attention. But if you can meet it with compassion, not submission, you will survive its panic. More than survive, you will grow beyond it. And soon, something else will begin to stir, a new kind of motivation. One that comes not from fear, but from soul. After the collapse of the false self, and once the storm of the ego's panic begins to settle, there comes a strange and almost imperceptible shift. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It doesn't arrive with certainty. It shows up like a whisper, a quiet pull, a sense of gentle curiosity that asks, what if I move toward this feeling? What if I followed that spark? And just like that, something new begins to stir within you, something softer, yet infinitely more powerful. This is the birth of soul-led desire. It doesn't feel like the drive you once knew. It isn't loud or urgent. It doesn't demand productivity. It doesn't care about your R-sum, your audience size, or your reputation. In fact, it often runs in the opposite direction of the things you once pursued to be successful. But it does feel real. It feels rooted. It feels like something inside of you is beginning to remember why you came here in the first place. Carl Jung believed that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness, and it's this deeper, holistic sense of self that starts to awake during this phase. You no longer want to chase things to prove your worth. Instead, you want to create because something inside you must be expressed. You want to serve because your heart aches when you don't. You want to grow not because you fear staying the same, but because the truth is calling you forward. Soul-led desire is quiet at first because it's been drowned out by noise for so long. Years of conditioning, survival mechanisms, and societal expectations have buried it beneath layers of should-as. But now that those layers have been peeled away, the voice of the soul starts to rise. It doesn't scream. It doesn't pressure. It simply nudges, and as you begin to listen to it slowly, gently, you feel your energy shift. Not in a burst of passion, but in the warm, steady return of meaning. You might feel drawn to spend time in nature. You might rediscover a forgotten art or hobby. You might begin to write, sing, paint, or build not for approval, but for the joy of it. You might feel the urge to help others not because it makes you look good, but because empathy is now rooted in you like a deep, living tree. What you're discovering is that your soul has always had a language, it's just been waiting for you to stop and listen. This new motivation doesn't burn you out. It nourishes you. It doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like alignment, and even though it may not provide immediate external success, it gives you something far greater inner peace. And yet, because this desire comes from the soul, not the ego, it may also challenge you. It might pull you away from your old social circles. It might ask you to make choices that confuse others. It may even lead you to abandon unfamiliar markers of success. But the more you follow it, the more whole you feel. The more alive, the more human. Jung would say that this is the self, the integrated center of your being finally emerging. The true self doesn't motivate with fear and insecurity. It moves you with truth, and when you act from this place, your actions carry a different frequency. They ripple outward in a way that touches people, not because you tried to impress them, but because you showed up as your authentic self. The birth of soul-led desire marks a turning point. No longer are you running from who you were. Now, you are moving toward who you're meant to be. When the soul begins to stir and soul-led desires quietly take root, you don't just feel different inside, you begin to see everything around you differently. The world, which once appeared as a fixed stage filled with clear roles and rules, now looks more like a dream you've just awakened from. And this awakening demands something subtle but profound relearning. It begins in the small moments. You walk down the same streets, interact with the same people, hear the same stories, but something shifted. Where you once reacted with frustration or jealousy, you now notice curiosity. Where you used to chase approval, You now question its worth. You begin to realize that much of what once consumed you wasn't real, not false in the literal sense, but constructed, a system of values, expectations, and routines designed more to maintain society than to nourish the soul. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He taught that much of our adult suffering comes not from external oppression, but from the unconscious agreement we make with a world that doesn't reflect our inner truth. For most people, life becomes a performance. We put on masks, play roles, follow rules, but after awakening, we begin to see these masks for what they are: useful, yes, but ultimately shallow if they are never removed. And so begins the long and gentle process of unlearning and relearning. You no longer seek meaning in the same places. You don't believe in the same myths. Success no longer means what it used to. Relationships shift. Conversations deepen or end. You are no longer drawn to what is flashy or impressive. Instead, you crave what is real, simple, honest, present. There's grief in this. You start to see how many of your past choices were made from fear rather than freedom. You recognize how much of your energy went toward pleasing others, managing impressions, or chasing a version of success that left you hollow. But there's beauty in this too, because once you see the illusion, you can never unsee it, and that clarity becomes your freedom. Now, you move more slowly. You question things. You trust your intuition over popular opinion. You start to sense when something feels off, not because of logic, but because your nervous system no longer tolerates disconnection. You speak less, but listen more deeply. You become selective not out of judgment, but out of self-respect. Your life begins to take on the texture of mindfulness, even if you don't call it that. What Jung called individuation is not a destination, it's a way of being in the world. And relearning the world through this new lens is not about rejecting everything, it's about re-choosing. Consciously, it's about returning to the same places, but with new eyes. It's about building a life from the inside out, not from the outside in. You start to see that your purpose isn't something you find in the world, it's something you bring to it. Not in grand gestures, but in how you make tea, how you speak to a friend, how you sit with your own pain, how you show up when no one is watching. The lens through which you see life now has depth, texture, soul. This is not the same world you once knew. And yet, it's always been this way. You were just asleep. Now, you're beginning to remember. And the remembering will guide you toward a life that is no longer driven by reaction, but shaped by intention. Something curious happens when you begin to see the world through new eyes. At first, it feels like you're standing still while everyone else rushes past you. The busyness, the ambitions, the noise, it's still out there, moving at full speed, but you're no longer trying to catch up. You've stepped out of the race. And yet, contrary to what you feared, your life does not fall apart. In fact, something unexpected begins to emerge from the silence, a deeper kind of motivation. One that doesn't scream but hums quietly from within. This motivation doesn't feel like the pressure you once knew. It doesn't drag you out of bed with anxiety or shame. It doesn't trade on caffeine or deadlines or the fear of being left behind. It's subtler, more grounded. It arrives like a gentle pull toward something meaningful, something sincere, not because it will impress anyone, not because it will make you more valuable, but simply because it feels like truth. Carl Jung believed that this form of desire, soul-aligned, rooted in the self, is not about striving, but about becoming. It's not about adding to yourself, but uncovering what was already there. When true motivation rises, it doesn't push. It draws you forward like a thread being pulled from the center of your being. And the work you do from that place, whether it's creating, helping, building, healing, is no longer a means to escape yourself. It becomes an extension of who you are. You may find yourself inspired to return to things you had once abandoned in writing, painting, teaching, walking, even resting, not out of obligation, but out of joy. The energy feels different, sustainable, kind. You no longer ask, "How will this make me look?" you ask, does this feel right in my body? Does this bring me peace? And that question becomes your compass. This kind of motivation may seem invisible to the outside world. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself with titles or trophies, but it's powerful in its clarity. You begin to trust your own rhythm. Some days are slow, contemplative. Others are charged with focused action. But none of it is forced. You're no longer chasing the feeling of being enough. You're beginning to know that you are. And something beautiful unfolds when you follow this inner current synchronicity. Opportunities begin to align in unexpected ways. People cross your path at the right moment. You stumble upon ideas that speak directly to your heart. Jung describes synchronicity as the meaningful coincidences that emerge when the unconscious becomes more conscious when you are in flow with your true self. But perhaps the most radical change is internal. You stop comparing your pace to anyone else's. You stop measuring success in numbers or accolades. You measure it in peace and authenticity, and the quiet knowing that you are walking your path, not someone else's. And that is where true motivation lives, not in the chase, but in the return. This is not the fire that burns you out. It's the slow-burning ember that lights your way home. If you've made it to the end of this video, it means you're not just searching for motivation, you're searching for meaning. And that journey, as Carl Jung showed us, isn't a straight path. It's a spiral that brings you back to yourself. Again and again, each time with more awareness. What you're feeling right now isn't failure. It's not laziness. It's not brokenness. It's the sacred pause before your real life begins. The false self is crumbling, and in its place, something more honest is emerging, a life rooted in soul, not survival. True motivation doesn't come from pressure, it grows in silence, in rest, in deep self-connection. So breathe, be patient, you're not behind, you're becoming. If this message spoke to something inside you, consider sharing it with someone else who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what resonated with you the most. I read every one. And if you're ready to keep diving deeper into Jungian wisdom, healing, and conscious self-discovery, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Until next time, trust your journey, honor your pace, and always choose truth over noise. Your soul is listening, so keep showing up.